It's Ash from SuperVideos back for another video for The Last of Us on HBO. On this video, I'm going to be doing a review for Season 1 of The Last of Us, and I'm going to be doing a general comparison to the video game, and I'm going to be sharing my thoughts around the show itself and how it measures next to the original, which is the video game. So stay tuned, we'll be right back to break this down. Alright, as always, before we dive into it, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. Also, obviously, spoiler alert if you haven't watched Season 1 yet, because I'm going to be going through some details that may spoil the first season for you. So with that said, let's dive right into it. As a fan of the game, I was actually really excited to see how the story could be adapted for the small screen. And overall, I think the show did a pretty good job of capturing the essence of the game. However, I do have to say that some of the magic was lost in translation. I keep hearing this is the best video game adaptation of all time, and I 100% agree with that, but at the same time, just saying that doesn't mean that it was perfect. And like I said, some of the magic was definitely lost in the translation and the adaptation into the TV screens. While the show did a good job of capturing the look and feel of the game's world, it didn't quite capture the sense of atmosphere. One of the things that made the game so special was its ability to immerse you in this world. And unfortunately, the show didn't quite achieve that same level of immersion. And I'm not expecting it to be exactly the same, because obviously in the game you can walk around and you can experience every little detail of the universe. You can't really replicate the exact same. But at the same time, I feel like we only got a minimal sense of immersion. One of the biggest problems I had with the show was the lack of infected and action, and I don't think I'll be lying if I say many fans had the same thoughts. Even those that fully enjoyed the show had some problems with the lack of infected and or the lack of action in the season. In fact, the season felt like a drama instead of a zombie horror show. So if we're truly looking at the show for what it's supposed to be, which is a zombie apocalyptic story, it didn't quite feel like it. And it felt like a drama with a little bit of infected here and there. In the game, the infected were a constant threat, and every encounter with them felt like a life or death struggle. In the show, however, there were only a handful of infected encounters, and they felt almost like an afterthought. This lack of tension and excitement really hurt the show for me, and it made the world feel less dangerous and less engaging. I hear people say this all the time as a joke, but I feel like it's not really a joke, but it's really a true reflection of what we saw. But it certainly feels like the Cure story was not as impactful, and it felt like it was not needed because there were no infected, or at least not as much, that would cause a problem for the survivors. You know what I mean? Another thing that really stood out to me about the show was how well it developed some of the side characters. Characters like Bill and Frank, even Marlene to an extent, Tess. They got a lot of attention in the show, a lot more than Joel and Ellie. And at times, it felt like they were almost overshadowing Joel and Ellie, who are the backbone of this story. If you take Joel and Ellie and their connection out of this story, the story's impact becomes so minimal that it doesn't even have the same effect. While I appreciate getting to know these characters better, I couldn't help but feel like they were taking away from the core relationship that made the game so special. Speaking of Joel and Ellie, I have to admit that their relationship felt a bit more forced in the show than it did in the game. It wasn't as natural, and it didn't develop quite as well as it did in the game. In the game, their relationship developed, more gradually, and it felt like there was a real sense of mutual respect and understanding between them, something that I didn't really sense in the show quite as much. In the show, it felt like their connection was rushed and didn't quite have the same emotional weight as it did in the game. Despite these issues, there were still plenty of things to enjoy about the show. For one, I really appreciated the cool cameos by Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, who voiced Joel and Ellie in the game. Troy played James, David's right hand man, while Ashley played Ellie's mom, Anna, which was a poetic and meaningful touch that they added to the story, which I absolutely enjoyed. I also have to say that the prologue of the show was a lot better than the game. It did a great job of setting up the world and establishing the relationship between Joel and his daughter Sarah, and also later on, Joel and Tess, and even Joel and Ellie to an extent. However, outside of the prologue, every time the show deviated from the source material, things felt rushed and not as well developed as they could have been. An example I could give for that is what they did for the Hunters. Although the Hunters story was pretty awesome and it was definitely a great addition to bring in Kathleen and Perry, it was not as fleshed out as it should have been. And I feel like when the show stuck to the plot of the game, things felt more natural and well paced. Yes, there were moments where the story was rushed, even though they were following the game. And obviously, the reason for that was because they were giving us less than what was in the game because of the length, and because bringing certain things in would mean they had to get rid of other more important things. Overall, I would give season 1 of The Last of Us on HBO a 7 out of 10. While it's not a perfect adaptation of the game, it's still a decent show that's worth checking out. The lack of infected and action may disappoint some fans, but the strong performances from the cast and the cool cameos by the game's voice actors make it worth watching, at least once. Certain episodes are rewatchable, but certain episodes are definitely not as rewatchable, and they don't really have that rewatchability factor to them. And the last thing I do want to bring up, since we got tons of Walking Dead fans on the channel, I thought I'll give a quick comparison between the two shows. While both shows share similar themes and post apocalyptic settings, The Last of Us on HBO offers a more focused and character driven story. It explores the moral dilemmas and emotional complexities of surviving in a world ravaged by a deadly virus, whereas The Walking Dead tends to focus more on the action and gore alongside the character driven stories that are very common on The Walking Dead. I mean, even The Walking Dead is criticized sometimes for being too character driven. But even with that, they still have a level of action and zombie gore that keeps those fans satisfied. The fans that are there because of the genre. They're there because they're zombie fans, and they're there because they want to see that in addition to the great character driven stories. But both of these shows have their strengths and weaknesses. But fans of The Last of Us game will likely appreciate the more nuanced and introspective approach taken by the HBO adaptation. And I feel like if we got the exact same thing, but with a bit more infected and a bit more action, those that are criticizing the show would be leaning more towards saying that they enjoyed this show maybe as much as the game. There you have it. Those are my thoughts on season 1 of The Last of Us on HBO. As always, I strive to be honest and constructive in my feedback, and I hope that this review has been helpful for those of you who are really trying to hear both sides of the story. Those that don't really love the season, but those that don't absolutely hate it either. And those that agree that It had some great elements, but there were definitely elements that could have been improved and should be improved in season 2. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.